Emily is our guest speaker this morning. And as you know, Emily has served the last 3 years very, very ably as our president. And she is going to talk to us this morning about everything important I learned from plants. Emily?
I'll start by saying the title is a little bit of a stretch. May, my daughter, read it this morning out loud and she said, "Everything you need to know you learn from plants? What about math?" Jason, I thought you'd like that. So maybe not everything, but there are some wonderful things we can learn from the plant world. I have always been a plant person. Whenever someone asked me what I wanted for a gift growing up, I'd say, something living. I grew up in a small city in Michigan, in a neighborhood with streets lined with Norway maples. A chain link fence surrounded our backyard, keeping the dog in most of the time. The trees and plants there reflected the sandy soil under the grass. Spruce trees and pine trees, several that I or my brothers had brought home from school years back. Northern white cedars with their tall and skinny columns, redbud trees, and one of my favorites I only learned the name of later in life, Harry Lauder's walking stick. A curly-limbed variety of hazel, perfect for making wands. We never had a garden in the ground, and I never knew any of my city friends to have one in their yard either. We had a raised stone planter we filled with flowers every spring. I loved going to the flower shop with my mom or dad, where we'd choose a multicolored flat of petunias or impatiens. We would bring them home and dig holes in the soil of the planter, filling each with blue Miracle-Gro-infused water before planting the starts. I was probably around 12 when I convinced my parents I wanted to plant something more interesting than flowers. We crossed the aisle at the flower store over to the veggie and fruit starts. That year, I brought home watermelon plants. I have a picture somewhere of myself planting them on the edge of the yard right up against those cedar trees. In the picture, they're probably spaced 10 inches apart. I was thrilled later to see a watermelon growing. It never did get bigger than a golf ball. I'd like to be able to tell you that golf ball-sized watermelon was the start of becoming an incredible gardener, and that every year I bring in lush baskets of produce, sweet lettuce, blemish-free tomatoes, and kale that is not shot through with a million tiny holes. I do love gardening, but I'm not the world's best gardener. I do have a garden every year that I do delight in. It always gets away from me sometime in August when we take our annual vacation to Michigan. But I am and will always be a student of the green world. Following my childhood love of the living world, I went on to study biology and then forestry. I learned to look at forests as whole systems, to look at the history of a forest by the clues left there, and to help guide the future of the forest through management. I came south several years out of college and was immediately bewildered with the forests here. They were so different. Gone were the flat, sandy, sometimes swampy forests of Michigan, with so many deer you could actually see a browse line around 4 feet off the ground. Under 4 feet, the forests were empty of any understory plants except bracken fern. Above 4 feet, where the deer couldn't reach, was where all the vegetation was. Here in the mountains of Virginia, the diversity of trees was dizzying. The understory was filled with a new cast of characters. It's been my privilege to live here and learn the forests and the plants. There are certainly those who know a lot more plants than I do, but I greet many friends now when I walk the woods, both trees and the plants that grow there, and under my feet hums the energy of an unseen world all its own. While completely separate with their own unique methods of procreation, energy production, and cellular structure, plants and animals have evolved simultaneously to display the most beautiful and fantastic diversity. In fact, in many cases, animal and plants have co-evolved, which means that they have learned how to ensure each other's success. by working in a beneficial way. We need plants, and occasionally plants need us, in that certain species have benefited from our tending over hundreds of years. Human cultures throughout time have recognized this relationship with the plant world, which provided both nourishment and healing. People in different corners of the world have often believed that for every human affliction, there is a plant that will address and heal that condition. Known by herbalists as the doctrine of signatures, this is the widespread belief, and it's found in Christian and Muslim countries, that plants carry in their design a divine stamp that displays what that plant is for. An example would be the plant eyebright, whose flower looks like bright blue eyes, and so that was the sign that it was used to treat eye diseases. Or skullcap, this is in the mint family and found around here. The flowers resemble small skulls and are believed to treat brain and nervous system disorders such as seizures and anxiety. Yarrow, which is one that you see in fields all around, was a popular battlefield herb due to its ability to stop bleeding and heal wounds. And yarrow's spreading, wiry stems and leaves resemble the human vascular system. Anthony Cavender in Folk Medicine in Southern Appalachia had this to say about the doctrine of signatures. According to a Cherokee myth, humans were without diseases until animals created them in retribution for the lack of respect humans have shown them. The plants, however, felt that animals were much too harsh and volunteered themselves to provide a cure for every disease the animals created. Similarly, the Europeans believed that humans were disease-free until their fall from grace. God, however, had mercy and provided a plant for every disease. The problem confronted by both the Cherokee and the Europeans, however, was identifying the appropriate plant for each disease. Well, I don't know exactly what to think about the doctrine of signatures. I know that it pays to be humble. Our relationships with plants are ancient. To wipe the slate of that history clean and only consider the usefulness of plants where its constituents have been separated out, studied in sterile labs and double-blind studies shows a lack of respect for our ancestral wisdom. Plants are really cool. They're definitely in their own class apart from kingdom Animalia. From our mammalian-centric perspective, they might seem limited. At first glance, they might seem hopelessly stuck to the ground wherever their seed happened to have fallen, rooted in place, vulnerable to whatever nature throws their way. But plants carry within them an innate intelligence that we are only beginning to grasp. We can learn a lot about observing the way they live, relate to their neighbors, and deal with adversity. So here are a few lessons learned from the plant world that I feel we people would be wise to consider. The first one is, I get by with a little help from my friends, or we are stronger together. People like to plant trees. I like to plant trees. Planting trees is an act of hope, and I highly recommend it. There's an old Chinese proverb, is it really an old Chinese proverb, that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. And a Greek proverb, which I have not confirmed is actually a Greek proverb, states, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they never know they shall sit in. And I love that. I've planted a lot of trees. It feels good to know that a tree carefully stuck in the ground, roots to native soil, is a force set in motion that is bigger than myself. So please excuse me in advance for my contrarianness of what I'm about to say, but planted trees usually don't hold a candle to a tree that has sprung up of its own volition in the forest. So by all means, plant trees, but whenever possible, protect forests and manage them in such a way that they can vigorously grow themselves. So why is that? Why does the naturally grown tree that have my lovingly planted seedling does not? Why does it shoot up, straight and green, while the tree I planted, if I'm lucky, remains simply green and leafed out in that first season? After a few years, it might also show some growth, but likely you'd always be able to pick it out as one that's not from here. So there are a couple reasons why the tree might be struggling. First, it's probably the shock of being pulled up from a nice nursery bed somewhere, shipped, stored, and finally replanted. Or maybe it's competition for water and nutrients from grass or weeds. But I think a lot of the time, the tree is lonely. It's missing out on community that is present in a natural forest stand. It doesn't have a mama looking out for it. This is a real thing. We used to think that trees that were planted in decent soil with enough moisture, but not too much, with weeds controlled and plenty of sun should do fine. We're just realizing the extent of a vast underground network providing connectedness between trees, and that this connection allows trees to communicate about dangers and nourish each other. This network is made up of a web of fungal filaments called mycorrhizae. Mushrooms are the small, visible fruiting bodies of these large underground organisms. The fungi aid trees by invading their roots and increasing water and nutrient supply to the trees. The trees send food down to the fungi. Dozens of trees can be connected by a single fungal organism, and often a single tree is in partnership with a multitude of fungi. Older trees send water and sugars to young trees when they're just starting out and need a branch up. There's even sharing amongst different species. Researchers have found that Douglas fir seedlings and paper birch shuttle carbon back and forth to one another seasonally via this mycorrhizal network. Paper birch send carbon to Douglas fir seedlings, especially when they're shaded in the summer, probably enhancing their survival. And in spring and fall, after paper birch lose their leaves, or don't have them to begin with, the Douglas fir return the favor. With three decades of research, forest ecologist Suzanne Simard gained this insight into trees. A forest is much more than what you see, she says. Now we all favor our own children, and I wonder, could Douglas fir recognize its own kin, like Mama Grizzly and her cub? So we set about an experiment and grew mother trees with kin and stranger seedlings. And it turns out they do recognize their kin. Mother trees colonize their kin with bigger mycorrhizal networks. They send them more carbon below the ground. They even reduce their own root competition to make elbow room for their kids. When mother trees are injured or dying, they also send messages of wisdom on to the next generation of seedlings. So we've used isotope tracing to trace carbon moving back from an injured mother tree, down her trunk, into the mycorrhizal network, and into her neighboring seedlings. Not only carbon, but defense signals. And these two compounds have increased the resistance of those seedlings to future stresses. So trees talk. What does this interconnectedness among trees and other organisms have to do with us? I don't think it's too far of a leap to say that every organism on Earth is evolved to thrive as part of an ecosystem, with mutual assistance from our friends and neighbors. Gone are the days when living by the motto of survival of the fittest serves us. Let's be deliberate in how we tend our networks, both physical and spiritual, where we choose to plug in, and what feeds our spirits. The second lesson, herbs that have struggled make the strongest medicine. Wildcrafters of medicinal herbs that are interested in making plant medicine know that while many plants grow dramatically large and beautifully when provided rich growing conditions, plenty of sunlight, consistent moisture, richly amended soils, the chemical constituents that make strong medicine emerge under stressful conditions, average to poor soils, droughts, rocky edges. Ginseng can be grown in garden beds under shade cloth, and it is up in Canada, Wisconsin. And while it tends to have more problems with fungal disease, it will grow quite large with hefty, pearly white and smooth roots. The Chinese are the world's ultimate connoisseurs of ginseng, and they pay a fraction of the price for field grown as for the wild woods grown. They want to see the growth rings, the roots crooked and showing where they've had to grow around rocks. And the color is most certainly not white. This is all borne out by science, and granted, this is not certainly every plant that this is the case for, and maybe not every herb, but strong medicine is often grown under stress. Echinacea is another example that can undergo a crude test for the strength of its medicine. Maybe you might have heard of echinacea and its use as an antimicrobial and antiviral herb. Well, if you chew the root after you take it out of the ground and maybe wash it off, it will numb your tongue, indicating a high level of the alkaloid responsible for these properties. Grown in soils that are too rich or moist, these alkaloids will be at lower levels, and the tongue numbing won't be as noticeable. Other plants where chemical constituents are lower in the absence of stress include thyme, calendula, St. John's wort, fir, rosemary. These plants may not physically be, in appearance, be different from other plants that have not undergone the stress. They might even look a little smaller than their counterparts that have always had every need met, but they carry in themselves strong medicine, both for their human neighbors and for themselves, as they're better able to fight off munching marauders and future stress. Trees also need a certain amount of challenge to grow strong. Folks that spend money on a new tree often stake it up because they're worried it will blow over. Unless the stake is tied very loosely and removed after the first year, this can be very hard on a tree. The wind that blows a seedling when it's small back and forth, and the resistance that the seedling has to have to hold itself upright, causes the bark to thicken and the wood to strengthen. Without this stress, the tree grows tall but is weak and is more likely to break off. This is not praise for needless suffering, and it's definitely not a call to go out and find trouble in order to strengthen one's inner reserves. But if we're at all like our distant cousin plants, hardship might create within us strong medicine and the ability to withstand the winds of life. And my third and final lesson is that spending time in forests can be healing. I'd wager that we all have special places outside. If one of them is a forest, I want you to picture it in your mind. How it looked, but also how it felt and smelled when you stood there in silence. One of mine is up Holston Mountain on the Appalachian Trail south of Damascus. To get there, you have to hike up. Switchbacks cut back and forth across the mountainside. As you get a little higher, you can look down and see houses and businesses in town growing smaller. You can hear the sounds of town down below. Finally, near the top of the ridge, the trail levels out a bit, and by now, your blood is pumping, and if you're me, it's pumping a lot. You follow the trail along the ridge as it turns a corner away from town, and the change is instantaneous. The sounds of town immediately disappear as the mountain stands between you and the town. There's only stillness, broken only by a bird on occasion. The sandy smell of rhododendron is in the air, sifting from bushes that line the trail. As your breathing slows, any stress you are holding is released. You might walk a bit farther along the ridge before turning around and re-entering civilization with a nice, relaxing downhill stroll. Walking meditation, mountain meditation. The Japanese actually have a term for the healing effect of spending time in the forest. Shinrin yoku, if anyone can correct me if that's incorrect pronunciation, is known as forest bathing. This refers to deliberately spending time in the forest for its healing effects. And research has been done on this. Researchers followed a group of 12 Japanese businessmen that spent 3 days in the forest and testing different levels after they emerged. There were positive effects on cortisol, blood pressure, and heart rate, a sizable increase in natural killer cells, even up to a month after their trip. I doubt that the positive effects of being in nature come as a surprise to any of us. It turns out that it's not just the soothing sounds or green beauty that causes these benefits, but also terpenes given off by the trees. These chemical compounds can be smelled, that characteristic pininess, and can be captured in essential oils. Research shows that inhaling these organic compounds increases levels of natural killer cells, increases anti-cancer proteins, and relaxes our parasympathetic nervous systems and reduces stress hormones. These compounds are also beneficial to the trees as they protect against disease and allow them to recover after injury. So to wrap this up, be more like plants. Tend your connections, recognizing that we need each other in ways we don't fully understand scientifically. Every living thing on this planet is a part of the web of life, and no one can stand alone. Know that while suffering is hard and it can seem like it is pointless and it's doled out so unevenly, it can be creating in us strong medicine, that the very things we have to struggle against are creating in us a wisdom, strength, and resilience for the future. Finally, be with plants. We've evolved with them from the very beginning. They are necessary for our survival in obvious ways, but also in unexpected and mysterious ways. And I'm going to close with a poem by Mary Oliver, When I Am Among Trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again, "It's simple," they say, "and you too have come into this world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine."